The airplane hummed at cruising altitude, passengers sipping coffee and scrolling through screens. A CEO in his late 40s leaned back smugly in first class, his laughter cutting across the quiet cabin. "Figures they'd seat me next to a single dad," he sneered, eyeing the man in his 30s, juggling a coloring book for his daughter. "Bet the closest you've ever been to flying is folding paper planes." The dad stayed silent, his jaw tight. But then the captain's voice cracked over the intercom, urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, is there any experienced fighter pilot on board? We need assistance immediately." Every head turned. The single dad slowly rose from his seat. "Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more videos like this." "Let's begin." The cabin went dead silent, tension clawing the air. The CEO's smug grin slipped as the single dad, Ethan Walker, handed his daughter's crayon back and whispered, "Stay with the nice lady here." "Sweetheart." The little girl clutched his sleeve, eyes wide with fear. Ethan bent down, kissed her forehead, and said softly, "Daddy will be right back. Promise." "Wait. You?" The CEO scoffed, his voice cracking with disbelief. "This guy. He can't even afford business class, and now he thinks he's Top Gun." Ethan didn't answer. His steps were steady, every movement radiating a quiet authority that no mocking could shake. Flight attendants rushed forward, their eyes lighting with desperate hope. One whispered, "Sir, are you really—" "I flew F-16s for 12 years, Ethan replied evenly. "Show me the cockpit." Gasps rippled through the rows. The CEO's face drained of color. Moments ago, he had reduced Ethan to nothing more than a struggling single dad. Now the truth hit harder than turbulence. This man wasn't ordinary. He was the very thing that could save them all. As Ethan disappeared behind the cockpit door, the cabin erupted in anxious chatter. A passenger murmured, "God bless him." Another clutched their hands in prayer. The CEO shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his arrogance collapsing under the weight of his own ignorance. But the story wasn't just about Ethan stepping into the cockpit. It was about a man mocked for his scars, his struggles, his sacrifices, now standing where few ever could. With lives hanging on his steadiness, the cockpit door slammed shut behind Ethan, and suddenly the roar of the engines sounded different, less like background noise, more like a warning drum. The captain, a middle-aged man with sweat already beading on his brow, turned sharply. His co-pilot's hands hovered trembling over the controls. "We lost hydraulics on the starboard side," the captain stammered. "Controls are stiff, autopilot's useless. If we can't stabilize them, we'll roll and lose altitude fast," Ethan finished, his voice steady, precise. He slid into the jump seat, hands moving like second nature. He wasn't guessing. He knew. "All right, tell me what you've tried." The captain rattled off a list, panic rising with every word. Ethan listened without blinking. His mind was racing back to sorties over desert skies, to nights where the wrong decision meant a flag folded neatly and handed to someone's widow. He'd sworn he left all that behind. But in this moment, in this cabin, the past wasn't a weight, it was a weapon. "Okay," Ethan said, his tone sharp, commanding. "I need manual override. Cut the autopilot completely. We'll feather the controls. I'll guide her down." The co-pilot hesitated. "You're not cleared." Ethan's eyes cut to him, calm but deadly serious. "You want cleared or you want alive?" "Choose." That was enough. They obeyed. Back in the cabin, fear spread like wildfire. The plane jolted, a violent shudder that sent cups crashing and passengers gasping. The CEO clutched his armrest so hard his knuckles whitened. Gone was the smirk, gone the superiority. He kept darting glances toward Ethan's little girl, who sat in row 8, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide but brave. One of the flight attendants crouched beside her, soothing her trembling hands. "Your dad's amazing," she whispered. "He's going to keep us safe," the girl nodded, whispering back with childlike certainty. "He always does." The CEO swallowed hard. That line cut through him like glass. In the cockpit, Ethan's hands danced over the instruments, every motion measured, every breath controlled. The captain muttered, "She's too heavy. We will," Ethan snapped, his jaw set. "Trust me." I've landed worse with enemy fire on my tail. This is just another Tuesday. The captain stared at him, this man he'd dismissed moments ago as just another passenger, and for the first time in hours, he exhaled. The altimeter spun lower. They were losing altitude. Okay, Ethan muttered, half to himself, half to the heavens. Come on, old girl. You and me, we're going to dance. Back in first class, the CEO's mask cracked. He turned to the passenger beside him, voice shaking. I mocked him, called him pathetic. He's up there saving us all, and I... He trailed off, shame crushing him. The passenger didn't even look at him. Maybe now you'll think before you judge. The CEO sank back, silence gnawing at him like guilt. For once in his life, his money, his status, his polished suit, none of it mattered. The only person that mattered was the single dad he'd tried to belittle. The cabin lurched again, passengers crying out. A woman prayed aloud, her hands trembling. A baby wailed. But over it all came Ethan's voice, calm and cutting through the PA system like a lifeline. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ethan Walker. I flew fighters for the United States Air Force. We've got a serious problem, but I need you to do something for me. Breathe. Stay calm, I promise you. I will get us down. Gasps filled the air. Relief, disbelief, hope. His daughter's face lit with pride. The CEO's eyes closed, tears welling. Inside the cockpit, alarms blared, the kind of shrieking that once triggered adrenaline and survival instincts drilled into Ethan's bones. His hands gripped the controls, fighting the roll. His muscles screamed as the jet tilted left, as if some invisible hand was trying to slam them into the ocean below. "Ease her nose," Ethan barked. Counter with rudder trim, slow, steady. Don't fight the beast, guide it. The co-pilot followed his lead. For the first time, the plane responded, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to give them a chance. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat rolled down Ethan's temples, stinging his eyes. His knuckles ached from the force on the yoke. The captain whispered, "How? How are you this calm?" Ethan's jaw tightened. His mind flickered back to a desert night sky, lit with tracer rounds, to radio static filled with the screams of a friend he couldn't save. His voice cracked, but only barely. "Because I know what happens when you panic. And I promised my daughter I'd come back." The words hung in the air, raw and cutting. Back in the cabin, the CEO couldn't look away from the little girl. She was hugging her stuffed rabbit, whispering prayers no child her age should know. And he realized, with an ache deep in his chest, that he'd spent years building towers of glass, money, power, prestige, while mocking men like Ethan who carried the weight of sacrifice quietly. A jolt shook the cabin. The lights flickered. Passengers screamed. The CEO buried his face in his hands. But through the chaos, Ethan's voice came again, calm and steady. "Brace, we're going in for landing. You're safe with me." The confidence in those words, it was more than skill. It was the sound of a man who'd faced death and still believed in life. The runway loomed ahead, shimmering heat waves distorting the strip of safety in the distance. Ethan's hands worked the controls, his whole body a coiled spring. Every nerve screamed at him to hold steady. His heart hammered, but his mind was steel. "Gear down," he ordered. The co-pilot's hand shook, but he obeyed. A harsh groan rattled the plane as the landing gear locked in place. "Flaps, 20, Ethan said, voice tight. The engines strained, fighting against gravity and steel. The ground rushed up to meet them. Ethan gritted his teeth, whispering through clenched jaw, "Not today." The wheels slammed onto the runway with a violent screech. Passengers screamed as the cabin rattled, like it would tear apart. Ethan fought the yoke, muscles burning, guiding the metal beast down the strip. The brakes howled, smoke curling up from the tires, and then silence. The plane screeched to a halt, shuddering but intact, alive. In the cabin, people burst into sobs, laughter, prayers. Strangers clutched each other, tears streaming. The CEO stumbled to his feet, his expensive suit damp with sweat, his face pale as chalk. Ethan emerged from the cockpit, his shirt clinging to him, his hands trembling from adrenaline. His daughter launched herself into his arms, tears wetting his collar. "I told you I'd be right back," he whispered. Voice breaking, the passengers erupted into applause. A thunder that shook the cabin harder than turbulence ever could. People stood, reaching to shake his hand, thank him, bless him. But Ethan only cared about the little arms wrapped around his neck. The CEO, red-eyed, approached slowly. His voice cracked. "Mr. Walker, I owe you my life. And my apology. I mocked you. His words failed him, but his tears spoke volumes. Ethan just looked at him, weary but steady. "Maybe next time, think before you look down on someone. You never know what battles they've already fought." The CEO nodded, ashamed, humbled. For the first time in his life, he bowed his head to someone who had no title, no fortune, only courage. The tarmac buzzed with flashing lights as the aircraft doors swung open. Emergency crews rushed forward, bracing for the worst. Yet they found hundreds of shaken but living souls stepping onto solid ground. Each one whispering Ethan's name like a prayer. Ethan carried his daughter in his arms. Her little fingers tangled in his collar, her cheek pressed against his chest. She whispered, "Daddy, you're my hero." His lips trembled against her hair as he answered, "No, sweetheart, you're mine. You're the reason I kept steady." But even as applause rippled across the runway, Ethan slipped to the side. He wasn't the type to bask in glory. His shoulders still bore the silent weight of men he'd flown with who never came home. To him, this wasn't about recognition. It was about keeping a promise. The CEO, Gregory Miles, stumbled down the stairs behind the crowd. His polished shoes scuffed, his tailored jacket torn at the shoulder. For the first time in years, he looked less like a titan of business and more like a man stripped bare. He watched Ethan walking away, every step carrying both exhaustion and strength, and something inside Gregory cracked wide open. "Mr. Walker," Gregory called, his voice hoarse. Ethan stopped, adjusting his daughter on his hip, and turned with guarded eyes. He wasn't angry, not even smug, just tired. Tired of being mocked, tired of carrying burdens unseen. Gregory swallowed hard. The words tasted foreign on his tongue. "Thank you. For my life, for everyone's." Ethan studied him for a long, piercing moment before replying. "You don't need to thank me. Just remember next time, you never know who you're sitting next to. Kindness costs nothing. Arrogance, it could cost everything." Gregory's face burned with shame. He wanted to say more, to explain, to grovel, but Ethan had already turned, walking toward the terminal with his daughter's small hand now clasped firmly in his. In the waiting area, reporters had already gathered, microphones thrusting forward, voices clamoring, "Are you really an Air Force veteran? How did you land with a hydraulic failure? Will you be recognized for this?" Ethan held up a hand, shielding his daughter's face. His voice was calm but firm. "No statements. I just want to get my little girl home." The crowd buzzed, but something about his dignity silenced them. The cameras stayed, but the tone shifted, not chasing gossip but documenting quiet heroism. Gregory lingered nearby, watching, guilt gnawing at him. His entire empire, boardrooms, skyscrapers, wealth, suddenly felt hollow compared to the sight of one father holding his child after saving hundreds. He approached again, slower this time, careful not to overwhelm. "Ethan, please, let me do something for you. Anything." Ethan shook his head. "I don't need charity. What I need is for people like you to stop assuming worth comes with a price tag." Gregory winced. The truth cut deep. "You're right," he admitted, voice raw. "All my life, I measured men by suits and seats in first class." He stopped, emotions choking him. "You just reminded me what real worth looks like." Ethan's daughter tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy, can we go home now?" He softened, his hardened soldier's face melting into a father's tenderness. "Yeah, kiddo, let's go." Days later, news networks ran the story endlessly. Single dad saves flight from disaster. Interviews with passengers painted him as a legend. But Ethan avoided the spotlight, focusing instead on normal routines. School lunches, bedtime stories, fixing leaky faucets in his small apartment. For him, heroism wasn't about fame. It was about keeping promises, but Gregory couldn't let it rest. The image of Ethan's calm hands guiding a failing plane burned into his memory. The way Ethan's daughter looked at him with unshakable faith, it haunted Gregory, not in torment, but in awakening. One evening, Gregory showed up at Ethan's modest doorstep, an envelope in hand. Ethan eyed him warily. "I told you I'm not interested in money," Ethan said. Gregory shook his head. "This isn't money. It's an offer, a position in my company, head of safety and operations. Your military training, your leadership, it's exactly what we need. And more than that, I need men like you around me to remind me of what matters." Ethan frowned, protective instincts flaring. "Why me? You could hire any polished executive." Gregory's eyes softened. "Because I don't trust them the way I trust the man who landed a crippled plane with hundreds of lives hanging in the balance." Ethan hesitated, staring down at his daughter playing with her stuffed rabbit on the floor. He thought of the long nights, the bills, the moments he'd felt invisible. Maybe this wasn't charity. Maybe it was a chance to rebuild with dignity. Finally, he nodded. "I'll consider it. But only if you understand. My daughter comes first, always." Gregory smiled faintly. "That's exactly why I want you. A man who knows what's truly valuable." Weeks later, Ethan walked into Gregory's skyscraper for his first day, his daughter's hand tucked in his. People whispered, recognizing the man from the headlines. But he didn't carry himself like a celebrity. He carried himself like a father, steady and grounded. In the boardroom, Gregory introduced him not as an employee, but as an example. "This man reminded me that leadership isn't about titles. It's about courage, sacrifice, and knowing who you're fighting for." Applause filled the room, but Ethan's eyes drifted to the small figure waving from the doorway, his daughter smiling. That was his real victory. The CEO who once mocked him had become his ally. The passengers who once dismissed him as ordinary now carried gratitude that would never fade. And Ethan, the quiet single dad, walked forward, not as a victim of judgment, but as a man who turned humiliation into redemption. Because sometimes the cruelest words spoken at 30,000 feet can be silenced forever by the steady hands of a man who refuses to break.